Good evening. Welcome to a spooky Halloween special edition of IKYA Live. Before we get started, already now down below, like tonight's episode and share with any friends, family, fellow spiritual seekers, and Halloween lovers. Because tonight is a low threshold, super fun, easy way to get to know IKYA as a spiritual teacher and to explore everything ghosts, goblins, and everything Halloween. So do that and follow us on social media, ikya.official on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and here on YouTube. And jump over to our website, ikya.org, sign up for our newsletter for everything you need to know about IKYA. And let's get started tonight because we have a really fun episode about Halloween, ghosts, and everything else. So remember that tonight is about you and questions and stories, and just let's really dig in and explore everything fun around Halloween and communicating with the dead and mythical creatures, whatever it is that might come up for you. Let's play and have fun tonight. So IKYA, let's go ahead and get started right away with the big question that we posed for everyone this snowy Halloween Eve here in Oslo. Are ghosts real?
It really depends what you mean by ghosts. Ghosts is simply a label that we put on a lot of different phenomena. A lot of it is our own imagination, of course, but if we put that to the side and look at when people have real experiences, what are they? Because they're quite simple to explain. Now, when you look at matter, we know that just like you can have memory, you can have an imprint. Every space, every collection of matter is basically just information, right? So this manifested world is still just a swarm of information in patterns. That's kind of the physics starting point. And all information, when repeated, can create an imprint, can create a pattern of movement. So often the typical thing where people experience a ghost, right? The strange thing about it is often that the ghost will be doing the same thing over and over again, right? It's a typical thing with a haunted house where some ghosts will be going from that room to that room. And that is basically, think of someone who's lived there and they've been doing the same thing again and again and again, right? The more we repeat something, the stronger that information will be, and that will create an imprint. Okay, so just think of, we can actually record ourselves based on how much we repeat something. And think of your own memories, right? When you repeat something, it just becomes part of you. It becomes part of how you think. It's the same thing when you have shocks, right? So when you experience something really shocking, that can create a real imprint on you. And the same thing when it comes to spaces. The same thing can happen. So there are two ways to accumulate that imprint. It's through repetition or through volume. So, but having an imprint does not mean that it's activated. Because if you think of all of us operating in slightly different energies and frequencies, right? And the information and kind of the vibration of what has been taking place, that will vary and operate within kind of like certain vibrations. Okay. If you think of the world being mirroring you, you can activate those imprints. So this is why two people can stand next to each other. One person will be experiencing it, the other person will not. Because it's being activated on that exact kind of wavelength, that channel, as that one person is. And it's the same thing in general when people go to houses where there is this type of activity. It really depends on, like, are they themselves broadcasting their energy on that channel, right? And some people are, and they will be experiencing things, and some people are not, right? So you have to kind of hit the right channel. And sometimes it's not only that, but it's, for instance, if you can think of your emotions, your thoughts, also carrying information and energy, right? If you have a kind of certain emotional programming or certain memories, that means that you're kind of vibrating in a specific way. That can be what kind of locks you into that channel. And then the imprint will become part of how life mirrors you. Because if we think in a broader sense, when we work in the field of spirituality and self-growth, we understand that the world is here to mirror us. We will only be able to experience the kind of outer counterpart of what we are kind of vibrating. And as I explained, it's basically when we are in denial of something in ourselves, it means that that will kind of bounce off. And then that will hit something in the world, and then that will be kind of activated. We will notice it because we will be kind of on that wavelength. So we have a very selective way of experiencing everything. So think of, we can activate events, we can activate interactions, we can activate how people respond to us by what we send out. If we think of this as imprints that we can activate, it's the same thing. So that's a kind of a typical part. And it means that they're completely harmless, they're passive, and they will only be activated through kind of the life energy that someone is projecting. That's the most common type, and there are so many variants, but in general, that's what they are. When I, for instance, am asked to remove these things, it's basically I just remove the programming, right? I remove the imprint, and then it's gone. Sometimes also an imprint, which is really interesting, because it has been made by a certain person, right? Think of everything we emanate, everything we send out, right? It's that information that will create patterns of movement in this swarm of information. But that is ours. So even when we leave a lifetime, we can have a connection to it. Because we exist after we go out of a lifetime, and we go through a lot of different lifetimes. So think of it, if that repeated behavior represents something that is unresolved, it will still be part of us after we leave the lifetime because we didn't quite resolve it. Now think of yourself, when you think back and relive moments in your life, they can be good, they can be bad, right? But there's always something that pulls you back in there. So when you relive your memories, a part of you will actually be there because time and space does not operate how humans normally think of it. In the world of physics, we know that it's a lot more flexible. So if we think of space as a consequence, not an original premise, basically means that coordinates, what we vibrate, that will determine where we are and how things are being expressed. So when you relive places you've been, yeah, you're kind of like a ghost there. Not necessarily that anyone will see you, but you're connected. Like the same thing when you have an imprint of a place in you that's connected to that place. So when you kind of relive and feel, that will connect to the information of you having been there. And depends on how strong your energy and your thought power is. But for instance, many people have experienced that loved ones, right? They can experience them, maybe hear them before they come home, right? This is the same thing. It's based on repetition. It's based on those imprints. So those will become channels of communication. So when you then think and feel about where you're going, right? You connect with your memories and all of that, you will be projecting into that imprint, and that can be activated, and then all of a sudden someone can hear you enter. This is quite common. And most kind of ghostly manifestations, it's just this. So think of when someone has left a lifetime and they still have unresolved stuff. That will kind of loop in their mind just like it will loop in your mind. And that can also trigger that imprint, right? And then they become more, it seems like they're more sentient, right? It's still like just an imprint being activated by the original person. having memories and reliving stuff, and then that happens based on what's actually imprinted. This is why they can never behave kind of like beyond the imprints. That's also why they never do. They kind of stay kind of within that space. It could be a house, it could be a place, no matter what it is. Where they can also be attached to an object, for instance. There are examples of people having bought furniture, right, and an imprint comes with it because a person was very attached to that piece of furniture, right? And I've also been asked to kind of remove prints from furniture and objects because there are a lot of phenomena coming like with it. When you place an imprint in a piece of furniture, that imprint is used to operating in a certain space. When the space changes and the imprint kind of tries to run, it will hit into things that are not how it's used to be, and then it becomes very strange. So this can also happen sometimes when you have imprints and there are changes being made, right? That movement is no longer possible. And also think of if then the original person now having passed are kind of thinking and reliving, and the space has changed. They're subconsciously just like going through it, and the energy will then go through, okay, we do this and we do that, and then it doesn't exist anymore. Then there's something going on, right? It's like you're not happy with your memory. And then that can actually then trigger that imprint to behave slightly differently, right? But it's still harmless. All ghosts are completely harmless. Again, they can only operate within kind of the recording. Yes? Mm.
All right, it is hopping here on YouTube tonight. Anne in Drammen, she has had several spirits in her house, and then she had a space clearing and kind of got it cleaned out. But she's wondering if she lives in a home where they kind of like gather before they go on, because she's pretty sure she has more spirits again. They don't bother her per se, but she's curious, does that seem to be the case?
This is a fun question, because if we think of like every place, right, based on experience, will vibrate differently. If you think of yourself compared to other people, your energy will be slightly different. Why? Right? You have different DNA, you have different experiences, different biology, different thought. All of that will mean that you as a swarm, a field of energy and information, you will be slightly different from other people. Now, everything is alive. All atoms are alive, they're vibrating. So a space, a house, a thing is also alive, but in a different way. Meaning that through what you find in the ground, when you have a space, that will be part of determining that kind of space and what's built in that space. So if the ground vibrates a certain way, that can kind of change the dimension slightly. And then you have buildings that can also adjust to that, and also the experiences and events taking place in that house or space can change the vibration slightly. And that becomes part of the structure, right? You have a lot of different imprints. Just like us as people, we are shaped and conditioned, right? Based on the life experience we have, and we change a little there, and we adapt there, and we become different. So it is with houses and spaces, and sometimes the changes simply mean that, there's an opening, like it vibrates differently, which means then that space or that place can all of a sudden vibrate a little bit different and kind of go into a different channel, right? I often compare this to, in the old days where we had like radios we had to tune. The thing often that happened was that once you found your channel, all of a sudden you could also hear a different channel, right? Because it's not static. It's not like this is channel, it kind of moves. So sometimes you would have like two channels that would start to kind of, influence each other, then they would move away. The same thing happens in what we think is reality, which is just like a very, very thin channel based on our collective experience and definitions, but they're a lot more present. So when our channel is kind of pulsating, so are other channels, and sometimes they will come together. So it's quite normal that in different areas the energy will be different and things will happen. Remember, there are so many different life forms. Also, we can call it energetic life forms. Different indigenous people, I often refer to them as different types of spirits and stuff. It's basically that we only relate to that kind of octave of life that is within what our physical senses can relate to, right? It doesn't mean that the rest is not there. We cannot see ultraviolet. We cannot see infrared. But think there is even more, right? So there's a lot of life present that we cannot sense as humans. It doesn't mean that they're not there. So they're all over. And some places will then have a vibrational variation that enables more contact. All over the world, indigenous people have related to, often holy places, right? Where the vibration is different. You find them in every country, all over. There will be different vibrations and people can sense it. It's easier for us to get into contact with other kind of realms and with the forefathers and with spirits. And it's completely natural. So this can also happen with buildings. It's completely harmless. And it doesn't necessarily mean that all of them are dead. It simply means that they are not existing on this particular octave of human life. And instead of think of it as that people or individuals come there, just think of it as it's the structure of that space that vibrates in such a way that it's more possible to experience it, right? But it's all over. Mm-hmm.
All right, we have a question in our live studio audience.
Yes, hello. I was wondering because my previous home, I really loved living there, and I moved from my home and I regretted moving away from it, and I had a really hard time getting over it. So I felt like it was repeating in my mind. So I felt like I had like an imprint on that place. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering, and I've been working on sort of letting that go and not regretting and moving on, but I felt like maybe I was a little bit of a ghost in that apartment to the new owners, and I was wondering is when you have like an imprint to a place and then new people move in, will that sort of like affect you backwards again from the new place?
This is an excellent question because this is how it happens, right? When you have ghosts, no, this is mine, right? Trying to push people out because it's that. But it takes more than that. It needs an enormous volume. Therefore, often the people that will be experienced as ghosts are therefore grumpy, right? They're very opinionated. They have that kind of spite because then there is volume to their repetition, right? So if you really feel like, I hate everyone who lives there, and you like we're in that energy for 10 years, and you're like, that's how it happens. So, but in essence, this is exactly how it happens. Because it's yours, and then you will be resenting, everyone coming in. You will try to push them away because it's yours. So this is kind of how it happens, but it needs a lot more volume. But still, you could say in that diluted way, that imprint will then still be part of the mix of the energy there, and it can still make people feel slightly uncomfortable without understanding why, right? They can feel like just like they feel kind of alienated or there's something, and often people are not aware that it's in the walls. Right? They don't think about it because it's not part of our culture. And the rest of the world is part of the culture, right? But we have kind of lost a lot of that. So, but just think of it as, it might be this very kind of subtle thing where they feel that, they're doing something wrong and they have no idea what it is. And often we can feel that way in different spaces, right? And we had no idea what it is, but there are always imprints. Even the weakest imprints can affect us. So we can get a thought or feeling that is very kind of subconscious, and we're not really aware of it. It just goes into the general soup of the subconscious, but will still be affected. This is part of existing, right? There are imprints everywhere. In nature, like every being who's ever been there is part of that, right? So think of everything that ever happens will make a mark. It never goes away. It becomes part of the layers of information that we can then experience. So life becomes richer and richer and richer and has more texture in information and energy as we kind of go along and as life unfolds. But we should never be kind of concerned about it unless we really have a very strong sense of like ownership and things has to be this way and I really hate them. Then we can look at it, but not just for the imprints, but obviously then we have a personality disorder that we need to check out as well. But creating imprints is part of life. But it's more fun to notice when these imprints are, a little kind of too much, right? And then how we can activate them with the same energy, because often we will then have the same tendencies, right? This is why, again, if you don't have any issues or energy kind of connected to the imprint, you will not be able to activate it because you don't operate on that channel. So it's all kind of just part of life, and we should also learn to be relaxed about it and not feel afraid or threatened.
I heard a fantastic Halloween story today that there was a group of adults in a neighborhood who told all the kids in the neighborhood that this green monster had escaped from an institution and they couldn't do trick-or-treating out in the neighborhood. They had to have a party at the house. So they had a party in the basement, and it was awesome until the green monster showed up and the kids went crazy. They like broke out of the basement windows, whatever. And at the end, the dad, who was the monster, he tried to like kind of, support the little girl, and then she threw up all over his shoes. She was so scared. And I share that because one of our questions on YouTube is that, there is this increasing interest among children and young people, like Stranger Things and whatever, about scary things and another side to life and that kind of thing. And Linetta's wondering, is there something to this that like we need to detox genetic fear? Like what's really going on with this increasing cultural interest around fear and Halloween and that kind of thing?
What a wonderful question. The reason for this is quite interesting. Since humans began interacting with each other and forming tribes, several 100,000 years ago, and they could speak, they would try to teach each other about their experiences, and they would make stories. Experiences would turn into stories they would also tell kids. Why? Because that was their education. Now, and why was it necessary to have them, to scare them? It's always been part of the stories that have been told. And often they would develop into stories with teaching morals, and how to fight evil and all of that. But the fascination for danger has always been there. And it's because, as I always say, it's the dangerous things that can kill you. It's what's lurking in the dark. So teaching kids to be afraid and to kind of trigger fear and to be able to pinpoint what should you be afraid of. It could be animals, it could be like different kind of nature phenomena, but making kids feel scared about the right things were really important for survival, right? And then also you could fear the neighboring tribe, turning them into monsters. So you would hate them and fear them and stay away from them and also be willing to kill them because they're dangerous. But all of this, so it's been part of human evolution. So being scared is in us. It's how we learn what is dangerous, right? And if we're then going to fast forward to now, there are too few things to be afraid of. So we freak out when we lose Wi-Fi, right? It's not the same, but we have it in us that we need to kind of be afraid to learn what is dangerous in life because our genetics have not changed. So we're drawn to horror movies and things because we need to feel fear. It's how we train ourselves to deal with dangerous situations, right? It's always been the case. Because also when we feel fear and we'll learn to not be overwhelmed by it, we will know how to deal with our fears in all of life's different situations. So this is part of human evolution. And because today most people live very safe lives, very controlled lives, very predictable lives, we're lacking that, right? So we feel the need, genetically, there is something missing in our education. And fear has always been teaching us how to survive. So without being told stories of fear, we're not educated in survival, right? It's in us. So today, we're drawn to it because we don't experience enough of it. So we can see when life becomes more scary, like it is now, right? Over time, people will seek entertainment that is more happy, right? So when life becomes too good, too predictable, too comfortable, we begin seeking the gore and the horror and what's kind of dangerous and all of that. So again, when life becomes more dangerous, we don't seek that anymore. Then we seek the happy things. So we can see where we collectively are based on what we are attracted to. So where we are right now, where people are still believing that what's happening in the world is just something we watch on our devices and then we do watch something else. We don't understand that it's actually happening. Once we experience it, we will seek more happy information. So we're not there yet. Mm-hmm.
We've got another question in the audience.
Yeah, I just wanted to share some experiences I had.
Mm-hmm.
First, I had one experience when I was sleeping, and I was alone in my bed. But during the night, I could sense someone was pulling the
covers?
way,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and I was pulling it back. You know, you have
Yeah.
that back and forth, and I could hear someone was breathing beside me, and I was like suddenly. I was aware of, but there's not supposed to be another person in the bed. Like, who is that person?
Right.
And so
Yes.
I had that type of experience. But also back to what you was talking about, fear, and how people need to be exposed for that. I feel also that I had a lot of those types of experiences to get trained to deal with different situations. Also, especially in the sleep state, I have this. I wake up, like in the dream. It's in the dream, but I'm still. It's not a dream.
Right.
And have this kind of experience, almost like poltergeist experiences, that things are just like thrown around, and there's a lot of activity, and where I start with getting afraid. And I have to work myself through it. It was especially in the beginning when I started studying with you.
Yeah.
I had those experiences.
Yes.
And I was really connecting with you, singing you, and I was working on that. But it was until the one time I had to really like stand up and then stop. This is my house.
Yeah.
I'm living here.
Yeah.
You cannot allow to do this. And then it stopped.
Yeah.
Another time I had to really like go into this kind of state of total surrender and opening my heart, and then I could see just like blue light just was folding like
Yes.
enveloping the whole situation, and
Yeah.
I could see a team just went away, and then everything was
Yes.
so yeah.
Yes. What this is connected to what is called sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is the state where the brain is partially asleep, because what happens when we sleep is that the aware part of the brain and the kind of connection you have to your body and the ability to move your body is kind of switched off. so that the subconscious part of your brain will be running the show, where you will be processing things and all of that, right? So what happens in sleep paralysis is that the aware part of the brain, a small part of it will be awake, which means that for the most part you can't move your body, and it feels kind of like you're in some kind of meat cocoon. And then in that state, you will often be experiencing presence. The thing is, this is actually what you're defining or describing is the nightmare. It was the mare of the night coming. So this is a very common experience. The very common experience is that when you have sleep paralysis, someone will come, pull your feet, pull your cover, scare you, breathe you, like push you, do all of these things. And you can explain this also as the conflict between the conscious brain and the subconscious brain. And so like, who's going to be in control? And because the brain will always turn something into an individual. We've done this since the beginning of time, where humans began creating their gods by looking at the forces of nature, turning them into people, right? And then people just start making up gods. So that's also been following our evolution. So it's part of the biology, right? So if you think of, there will be a discussion, because remember that the subconscious brain has a very different sense of reality. It's more expanded. It will take in much more information because that's the job. If you think of the conscious part of the brain, which you use when you're awake, hopefully, it's more of that focus, right? It's like a microscope. You can look at, we'll focus on that. I live within a defined reality, and I'm doing this and this and this, and then I can, create a pathway, and then I achieve goals. Subconscious brain does not really relate to time or space or dimension the same way. It's information. And that is more correct, because we exist in enormous fields of information. And then our brain will kind of filter it and refine it and turn it into this. But in the subconscious brain, we're supposed to be in contact with a lot of different things. So when that is very active, and then you still have parts of the aware brain being awake, that will be an enormous conflict in what reality actually is. So it's also a biological phenomenon that you will experience the nightmare coming to you. And it was also, people have experienced that they're kind of like being like thrown around, or like all of that. That's part of the mare. It's also been, people have also associated this with the devil, of course. In the church, they turned this into the devil coming to you to scare people, of course, because it meant that they could be possessed. So they needed to repent and pay money and all of that. But it's a completely natural thing. But also what happens, because the subjective mind is dealing with our problems, the subconscious mind is a problem solver. It is always trying to deal with our experience and trying to figure out what is actually going on. When I'm connecting what we are experiencing through this little peephole of the aware brain, and we put this into the enormous kind of cosmic soup of the subconscious, what happens then? We're trying to figure out. And it's all of that going on, right? And all the kind of conflicts and problems. And what we often fear, one of the reasons why humans fear the dark is because we fear our own darkness. Everything that's unresolved, that is what we're trying to run away from. So then we can feel often, for instance, when you have dreams where you're being chased, it's very often by the problems you haven't solved. It's simply the subconscious part of your mind trying to tell you that you're running away from your problems. You're not dealing with things. So it's haunting you. It's coming to take you. Because that's often the stories we make in order to justify that we're running away. right? So we have so many different ways to turn our problems into people. And often we turn other people into our problems for the same reason. So we always project, we always do this. So, this is a big part of what's happening. Now, in addition, because the subconscious part of your brain is connected to a multidimensional reality, it's not as limited to this version as your conscious brain, because that is supposed to work like within this octave. Your subconscious is a lot more flexible. It also means that you can experience other energies and other types of presence and beings in addition. And often when you go into the state of the more kind of nightmarish thing through sleep paralysis, that will also always trigger fear. And then everything will be interpreted through that. But it's an excellent way to practice fear and then also figure out how to work through it, because you're also then in contact with the multidimensional state within yourself. And in that state, often many can experience astral travel and stuff like that. It's completely normal. It's not dangerous. And it's always healthy to face our fears, right? Because then we understand, oh, right, I can deal with stuff. I can take care of everything, because basically dealing with our karma is dealing with our challenges, because that's what our karma is. It's things we haven't figured out yet. So it's kind of just part of a natural process of our minds and our consciousness being in touch with our entirety of our lives and existence and trying to figure things out, and then the different parts of it being both in fear and resistance. But again, sleep paralysis is very common, and I think most people experience it from time to time. It's also common when you begin a spiritual journey and when you meditate a lot, for instance. That will enhance the bridge between the conscious and the subconscious, meaning that sleep paralysis will happen more often. It's especially in the beginning of your practices. So it's also quite common when people start studying with me that for the first years they will have more experience of sleep paralysis, because they're building the bridge between the conscious and the subconscious, and then the brain gets a little confused about, are we sleeping now or are we supposed to be awake? Because meditation is both, right? So, and you will have an enhanced bridge of communication between the two going on at the same time, and the brain is not used to that, right? So you'll move into that state more often. But again, this is all natural and fun when we learn how to work with it.
All right, we've got a question from Rick in the audience.
This is fun. So I have two questions, and it may turn out that it's the same thing, so play with this. But the one is that I grew up in a Christian home, and so therefore we were taught that Satan is an evil, it's a force. It's not just, yes, we make it into a person, but it's a force, it's a real thing. And so my question is just, if millions and millions and millions of people have the same fear, does that then become a big impression, as you were talking about? And then secondly, in shamanic communities and stuff like that, even in this community, I've heard talk of entities that I don't really understand. What is that? So help me link those two together.
Yes. Now, back to, because like the concept of evil is fun. It's really fun because it's stupid and interesting. Now, this actually comes from evolution. And as humans began forming, tribes and all that, visual communication became more important than anything else, right? Seeing each other, it's how we can work in harmony, how we can work together. You can't just sniff, right? You need to see. So over time, all our other senses became weaker, and our visual sense became everything, which means in the darkness, we got nothing, right? We need to see to understand. So think of surviving together in a group, and we're supposed to work in harmony. We have to observe each other. in so many different ways, right? So the visual is extremely important. So when there's darkness we can't see, and we're basically sitting ducks, like we can be attacked, because when we don't have the enhanced senses of other animals, we'll be killed. Animals can easily kill us. Anything can easily kill us. Anything can attack us. Someone can just like hide behind a tree and we can't see them, right? So it's dangerous. So darkness for humans throughout evolution, that's dangerous, right? So we learn to fear the darkness. And then we begin to associate that with everything we can't see, everything we can't understand. And then, of course, when we need to be afraid of what's in the dark, we begin creating stories about who they are and how they, because we need to tell our kids. So we'll tell them about monsters and about dangerous things. And if they say, well, I've seen this animal, it's not that dangerous, but then we introduce, the supernatural beings that are really evil, right? Because we need to up it. Just like when you look at special effects in movies, right? Now you have movies that are just special effects, right? And you have actors just walking around in front of a green screen trying to sell it, but it's just really special effects. It's that. So you need to kind of like throughout history make it worse to make it believable. It's the strange thing about human brain is that if it's not believable, it's only then it's believable, right? Because then it's a matter of belief. Right? So if we create these monsters that are out to get you, in a way you want to believe it. Because then you can put a label on everything that's dangerous. And when it comes to the devil, it's just one of these wonderful inventions because it's like one-stop shopping. Life is so complicated. Think of like all the different reasons and challenges and look at life, everything that can possibly be fucked up, it will at some point. Everything that is not working, your own dysfunctions, other people's dysfunctions, everything that's happening. And it's difficult to figure out, why is this happening? Why should, what am I supposed to learn? What should I change? What's my part? What's the other? But it's so much easier to, it's the devil, right? It's one-stop shopping, and it means that you have one reason for everything. Car not working, it's the devil, right? Someone saying that you don't agree, oh, well, they're possessed by the devil. Life is so much easier to deal with. So people become very happy when they can believe in the devil, right? Because then they understand everything, right? Every single problem in existence, that's the devil. And then it's because someone is possessed, well, nothing more to learn here. And it works because humans are simple creatures, right? So this is why, right? And it calms the mind because otherwise life is extremely complex and complicated, right? So it's just think of it, it's a stroke of genius, right? To have like one reason for everything, and it's got nothing to do with you, right? It's never your fault, or like, it's always the devil. Instead of finding real solutions, it's just like finding someone to blame. It's very childish and it's very charming, but it's also utterly stupid, right? And this also, when we become more intelligent, when we start to investigate life, we grow out of that because we start seeing that, oh, right, it's just me being mirrored. Okay, and I can't really blame anyone because I can see how I'm creating this, what I'm to learn, the interaction between me and other people, and all of that. We become interested in growing, not blaming, right? Because we figure out how to do it. When we don't know how to learn from something, when we can't see what it means, we need something to blame. So the devil is excellent. And I would like for people to hold on to that, just like Santa Claus and all of that. It's Dark Santa. It's just that, right? Giving you all the terrible stuff. But it's like, as long as you need that excuse, when you're not ready to take responsibility for your journey and you have no idea how to grow, how to learn, and life is just chaos to you, hold on to the devil for as long as you can, because at some point, just like Santa Claus, you will grow out of it. But it's a very charming approach to everything that's not working. So, yeah. Now, when it comes to entities, when we look at nature, right? Because we also need to talk about the concept of evil and all of that. So bear with me, I will be chatting for quite a while here. Now, when you look at nature, basically half of life are building, half of life are then breaking it down. So basically think you have a lot of Legos. Matter is Legos, and you can combine it in many different ways and build things. You will have life forms doing that because that will be how they learn. That will be their journey. And then you have life forms that pull them apart because there's only a certain amount of Legos. So once you've built something, you need to pull it apart to be able to build something else. So everything in life, it builds, and then it comes to a point where it has to be broken down, right? So you'll have life forms doing that. They're not evil. They're just doing their job. You have mushrooms, and you have insects, and you have bacteria, you have all of that. It's half, right? And so it is in everything else. So you have also, when we expand our sense of dimension, there will be a lot of life forms that are not physical, of course, and some build and some break down. Think of your own body, right? You have a lot of bacteria. You can have virus, you can have this or that. You can have so many kind of microbes and little tiny life forms and insects. Like there's just so much of it. And it could be up to 7 kilos. So like 15 pounds. So, and without it, we would die. The body cannot sustain itself without the collaboration with all of these life forms because it also represents a very important principle that all life is connected, right? If we removed all the microbes and microorganisms and life forms from this body, you would die within a couple of seconds, right? So your health means that you are part of an ecosystem and you need an ecology that contains a lot of different life forms. So it's the same thing when it comes to your energy. Because just like, for instance, you can have candida. We all have candida. There are about 200 different varieties. And sometimes we can have too much. But it's not like they decide that let's attack this person and multiply and then make him eat candy. It's the other way around. It's basically when we create an ecology that is unhealthy and out of balance with nature, meaning that we eat the wrong foods and create a body chemistry that's completely out of balance, often combined with having too many heavy metals. Then how nature will heal you is through candida. So you will eat too much like sugar and all of that, combined with also having heavy metal poisoning, not to the level where it's poisoning, but you will have too much. That combination is a winner. You will always get more candida because it's trying to help you digest. That is a bacteria that will help you break it down over time. But because they live, and they live a happy life, they will also produce a lot of waste. So it is with a lot of these microorganisms that you have in your system. When you have a lot of them, of course, they will produce waste. And often that is what you react to. Candida is kind of fun in the way that when you have a lot of them, you've basically made your own candida zoo. And then when they've moved in, they want to be fed. So they have learned to create the signal, like chemical signals that will make you crave sugar and baked goods. This is evolution for you. It's like, it's collaboration, but they understand, they've been experimenting. right? It's just like random stuff happening and something works and those colonies will survive. This is how it works. It's not like they sat down and had a meeting and tried to figure out the frequency of Cinnabons. It's not how it works, but it means that there will be millions of different, just like, you know, things happening and something worked and they will become dominant. So through evolution, they've figured out how to stimulate the cravings. Once they're already too many. So, but their job is to balance you because you are out of balance. You are the problem. You've been feeding yourself. You've been mistreating yourself, and nature will have to try to balance everything. Because remember, your body is part of nature. It's part of the ecosystem. And then your imbalances represent a threat to the balance in nature. So nature will try to balance you and use the strategies that are there. When it comes to your energies, what you produce, it's the same thing. And there are many energetic life forms, and we often call them entities. They're not little devils. Think of them as bacteria, as microorganisms, because mostly that's what they are energetically. It's the same thing. Think of like when you are producing a body chemistry in inner ecology that's not healthy, it goes into nature, right? And nature will have to deal with it. That's not what nature wants. You should already be in harmony. So, nature will try to solve that by going into you and balancing you out. So, for instance, if you have a lot of anger, right? If you have a lot of unhealthy thoughts and emotions, why should that energy be flushed straight out into nature? So, there are life forms that can help nature break this down. And that is basically what entities are. They are energetic life forms, just like microorganisms. And they're part of that part of the ecosystem that will break down the Legos. Even energy has to be broken down. Everything will have to be refined and broken down into base elements. Right? So it is with energy in everything you produce. So when you produce too much of something, you're polluting. And then microorganisms will be attracted to that, because for them it's food. So if you produce too much of a certain energy, if you are in a state of imbalance, you will attract these type of life forms. And some of them have learned how to create more of those energies by stimulating specific thoughts and emotions, because then you become a vending machine. Just like for Candida, once you have established a huge population, you're just a vending machine for them. And for many of these life forms, you can become their vending machine, right? But they're harmless. So when they can stimulate certain thoughts or emotions, it is because evolution has taught them that works. For many people, it's fear, it's anxiety, it's negativity, it's all of that. And they just like, whenever a button works, they will push it. But in themselves, they're harmless. Right? There is no such thing as evil in itself. Evil is ignorance. The only evil life form on this planet are humans. We tick all the boxes if we were to sit down and define evil. No other life form will kind of comply with those criteria. So it's basically when you look at someone doing their thing, and then you look at how does this affect me? And what would this mean if I did this intentionally? Evil. Right? It's simply how we observe it and the story we make based on how it affects us. And often what we can see as evil is when we are in a state of extreme self-centeredness, we act out of self-interest without any consideration for how it affects others, right? And humans do that all the time. It's what we're known for. So And if you think for a moment, like, how do you think all other life forms on this planet would see humans? How would they define humans? Looking at what humans do as part of the ecosystem. So humans should be very quiet about evil, right? Because we're as close as it gets, and still most humans, but we're good. We only want to, yeah, sure, evil. Because it's self-interest, right? And it's just that. It's ignorance. It's ignorance of the consequences. And the same thing you could then label Candida as evil because it's making me eat Cinnabons. But it's like, not really. You get the signals, but it's not like you have to. And the same thing with all types of entities. They're just feeding off and trying to balance life. But once you attract, they will also try to stimulate, which is a good reminder, right? Because often when we get Candida, and it's a result of having, the wrong diet, having Candida is what will make us do something about it. And often then we'll have to go on a diet, which we wouldn't have done without the Candida. It's part of creating balance is when we have an overpopulation, when we're being stimulated, instead of blaming them, which is, right, this is the wake-up call. This is what I need in order to change my patterns and behaviors, right? So when we experience entities in our system, we need to look at what am I producing? Why am I doing that? And how do I stop it? Right? We need to learn then to become more harmonious, balanced beings. Right? Because when we don't attract these life forms. But in themselves, they're harmless. They're just doing a job in the enormous ecosystem of life. Okay, next question.
So one of the most famous ghost stories in the United States is about a family in 1921 who moved into a classic old haunted house, big old, like gas lighting and really poorly lit, all that kind of thing. And almost immediately they started being terrorized by ghosts, sounds of things moving, but also depression and feeling like being strangled at night and things like that. And of course, about a year later, a scientist suggested, have you had your furnace checked? And they did. And of course, the furnace was leaking into the house with carbon monoxide. So these people were being poisoned by carbon monoxide. As soon as they fixed it, they weren't haunted anymore. And on YouTube, Hogna, he shares that one of his friends, after a therapy session with ketamine, thought that he and his colleague were trolls. And, and then Katrina, her grandfather, had visions during the last few years of his life that he thought maybe he was starting to have connections to the other side. But she wondered what role does sort of medicine-based or poison-induced visions and stuff play in this whole discussion that we're having tonight?
It really depends because, we have to understand that everything we experience is something that is happening in our brain when it comes to us as human beings, right? We have our senses, and we take in information, and the brain will connect it, stitch it together, and then use your DNA and your memories and experience as a sounding board to then interpret what is this, because in itself it means nothing. You have to interpret it through that sounding board, and then the experience is being created. This happens in less than a second. But everything we create is happening in our brain. And when we understand that, because most people believe that they see what they see, that's real. What we hear is real, that our senses are real. We're picking up on information, and then the brain will turn it into something. So it's not real. And that means that anything can be put into that mix. The brain can then use information from your memory if it feels that it lacks something here. It can make things up based on its ability to fill in gaps. You can pick up on things. So it's important to understand that the brain does not only relate to your physical senses to create an experience. It will create the illusion, in a way, a hologram of an experience based on your senses and then a lot of things from your subconscious. So sometimes the subconscious can play a bigger part, right? And it will be mixed together. So of course, different kind of chemical states can make that happen. And this is also why when we are hallucinating, it's simply that how the brain creates experiences have changed, right? It will include information that will normally be excluded because the brain filters out almost everything because you want a consistent experience. So what happens when we are under the influence of different things? The brain will calculate how to create this hologram differently. And that's really what's happening. So, and the thing is, all information is real. You can't make it up. But it doesn't mean that it's relevant. And also, for instance, when you pick up on something that comes from a different dimension, for instance, dimension basically meaning beyond the octave of human experience. It can still be here, but we are not seeing it. So we can pick up on that and the brain will just like put it into the mix and then maybe turn it into something completely different because it will be interpreting it based on this body's experience and the DNA, which means when you take something that belongs to a different type of reality and you will filter through what that information would mean in this dimension, all of a sudden it means something completely different, right? And then that is being put into that hologram and then you experience it as if it's happening right here, right now. So this is also why we experience so many interesting things. And also when we then expand our awareness, the brain will then accept more of what will normally filter out because it doesn't quite know what are the rules now because we can sense that we're in a different space. So it's completely natural. And remember that life is extremely complex, right? If we think of it's like my arms going in both directions and humans pick up on this, the rest also exist. And we can pick up on a lot more, and we are. Spiritual growth work means that we gradually pick up on more and more, and how the brain then will create experience will change. Most people experience more kind of multidimensional sensory information, which means we can experience something, we can sense something, but we can't necessarily see it, but we know it's there. We kind of sense beyond the physical senses, and the brain learns how to relate to it. But for many people, when it comes to experience with ghosts and different phenomena, it's still, we are influenced by something, and the hologram in the brain will then change, especially if we then have a story of fear, right? We have a need to be able to identify what we are fearing. And if we tell ourselves that we have a story that this is what it is, we will begin to see it because the brain feels obligated to give it to us, because that it can create it as a hologram, right? So our sense of how our brain works is marvelous. But we're also getting tricked, right? So for me, it's important that we understand our biology and DNA and how we operate, but also understand that, yes, we're in contact with an enormous universe. And our poor brain is not able to pick up on a lot of it. But we have these kind of moments and these situations where the brain will calculate differently, and we can also train ourselves. And this is part of kind of spiritual work, that you gradually expand the hologram that your brain is creating, right? But everything exists, right? It doesn't mean that it's dangerous. Also when it comes to evil and this idea that there are so many like dangerous things, look at this planet. can you name a single life form, except for humans, that would qualify as evil? It doesn't exist, right? You can look at any life form and they're just doing their thing, right? So it is everywhere else. It's just how we observe based on self-interest. That's how evil become a thing. And I think also, well, if we are obsessed with evil, like who's the evil person? Because like what we fill our life with is just what's in us, right? If we are filled with love, we will see love. If we're filled with the idea of evil, we will see evil. And often those people who are very much engaged in the thoughts and ideas of evil, they often have behaviors that are questionable in many ways. They can be very judgmental, they can be very fear-driven, all of that, right? So we need to then examine, what are we sending out? If this is the story we want to be true, I'm sure also if you want, you can go into nature and define different life forms as evil. But they're not. There is no such thing as evil in and of itself. It's just the interpretation based on self-interest, right? And therefore, the best way is to, when we experience something that triggers the story of evil, we need to look at ourselves and no. I'm then in a state of self-interest. I'm in my ego, and I fear everything that is beyond my control. I need to transform this into love because that's the potential. So the concept of evil is simply reminding me that I'm in a state of ego. I'm not in a state of harmony. I'm not in a state of ecosystem, where I see everything else as competition, as something that is getting in my way, which means I have the same way of thinking. It's a mirror. So if you're haunted by evil, yeah, it's you.
All right, back to our studio audience for a question.
I just wanted to share also, this is another angle. What I experienced is, and I also heard that a lot of others have experienced the same too. We had this experience on driving. It was snow. My mother was driving, and there were a car coming in the front. And then it started to slide, and it should be a collision, and we was just waiting for it, for the collision, and it didn't happen. It was almost like that car just slipped through our car. So it didn't happen, and I also heard others have experienced similar things.
Absolutely, this is very normal.
Yeah, so could you
But
explain
again,
a little bit
it's
around
like
that? Yeah.
when we understand that matter in the way that like normal people think of it does not exist. It's information moving in patterns. In the world of physics, one is aware of this. So matter is a projection, right? It's like we're looking, onto a like 3D screen. It's a projection. It's not real. And it's that understanding that it's a lot more flexible. So these things are quite normal. And sometimes it's because of intervention. Remember that when we go through life, it's padded. It's being person-proofed. You belong, between your incarnations, you always kind of go back to your class. We often call that a cluster. It could be a huge group of individuals, and you incarnate in different constellations because you're studying some of the same things. So you will know each other and support each other. And when someone is an incarnation, those who are not will be part of the support team, also trying to facilitate and assist and be rooting for you and trying to assist without interfering too much directly, because obviously everybody knows that the person in the incarnation has to figure out their own karma. But their job is to do stuff like this. And it's very common. When you look at how humans think and feel and behave, it's a miracle that anyone is alive, right? There is so much protection And it's incredible, but and it's also incredible that humans can't see it. But it's just like a toddler, like running around, and you have like several adults trying to childproof everything and make sure that this toddler can have the experience of freedom. And of course, he will believe that he is doing it all by himself. He can't see the childproofing part of it. It happens all the time, and most of the time, well, all the time, you're not aware of it. It's also rearranging things, making sure things are not happening, only what is productive. And the more you move into spiritual studies, that part of it will be enhanced. A big part of my job is to rearrange people's incarnations. So when people start studying with me, I will begin to kind of rearrange it, to make it, to optimize it. Because then when you are starting to move through spiritual studies, there are certain karmic events that are no longer necessary, right? Because you're now entering a space where you are actively learning, where you want to be conscious. It means that your karma can be channeled differently. So often what we do is to iron out some of these events and manifestations that are no longer productive, right? And that is a big part of what we do, because we want to create the best kind of journey spiritually, so you can move into your potentials instead of just, fucking up. And there's that, because often when it comes to unproductive karmic manifestations, we can spend so much time on those. So we will always monitor and see what type of karmic events are actually necessary. So we'll start to iron out some of them, and then we'll add some new ones that will then pull you in the direction of your potentials. But this is completely natural. Remember that there are so many different dimensions, and we exist in so many different ways, and everybody are helping everybody else. Right? Humans are so disconnected from this. It's embarrassing, because it's how life works. Everybody is supporting everybody else. And humans at some point will have to discover this, that the planet and nature is not here to be conquered, right? It's here because we all need each other to survive. We all need to learn. We all need to nurture. We all need to support. And humans will have to learn that at some point. So when they're not able to do that with what they can see, of course they're not able to understand with things they can't, right? But it's still there. You're all supported by so many beings, all the time, without end. And when you leave this lifetime, you will be part of that family again, and then you will be assisting. It's how it is, because we both learn through our own journey, but also through observing and facilitating the journey of other beings, right? But this is what's really going on. This is also why, in nature, there is no evil. There's only the intention of love, growth, and healing. The rest is our resistance and the stories we make up. And humans are still very primitive, right? So how we survive is by seeing everything as an enemy, competing, hunting, killing, going to war, instead of working together. We haven't quite figured out that. We're very selective, right, with who we want to be close to, who we want to work with, how we can collaborate. All others are enemies, right? So, of course, humans have an enormous darkness, right? So it's one thing with the things we cannot see physically, but it's that humans are not able to see how life works. That's the true darkness. And that's the scariest thing of all, because to most humans, life is just chaos, right? And then you have to fight. It's complete order. If we just look at this planet, the ecosystem is working. And we're in a physical ecosystem, we're in a multidimensional ecosystem, we're in a spiritual ecosystem, and it's all working. And when we learn how to work with it, it's the only way we can find harmony.
All right, we've got some creatures on the list that people would like a little more insight in tonight. Let's start with unicorns, and especially their role in the culture of young children and girls.
Yes, unicorns are wonderful. They exist. They do not exist here, obviously. But they exist. And, when you look at mythical creatures, very often they're the result of interactions with, these beings and what people get out of them. So yes, they exist. And they do represent creativity and strength and playfulness and kind of connecting to both your flow and your own expression, right? So it's all of that. And I think one of the reasons why unicorns have become more popular is because of that. When you look at young people, and many, especially those which we often refer to being part of the new paradigm, meaning that they are kids with a higher level of consciousness incarnating to be part of the transition and change on this planet, they often feel that they have all of this inside of them, right? And they don't identify with the current culture on this planet. They say we can't do that because we can't, but they can see it, right? So they don't see that there's nothing here to be saved. Like we need to get rid of this. So they feel that they're outside, and they often have connection to more flow, more creativity, new ways of doing things, and also doing it like in their own way and finding their own expression. And of course, like unicorns are all about kind of stimulating that. So unicorns will often come to people in their dreams, and they're part of bringing that kind of vibration to this planet. And it doesn't mean that people necessarily will remember them, but as a life form, as a kind of higher life form, that is kind of their vibration. This is what they're trying to kind of bring. And kids are more open, right? And that's also, the connection is that a lot of these kids coming from different planets and coming like to this planet in the higher consciousness and representing who humans will be in a couple hundred years. The vibration from the unicorn will also assist them in maintaining their integrity and not being corrupted by the current culture, right? So they are important, but there are so many different beings. Remember that an aware spiritual being does not have to look like a human, right? Often we, it has to be human. No, it does not. It can be any life form and any variation. And often when a certain form will be established in the collective mind, that can still be a little different from the original version, that will be used as a projection point, right, for that being or that function. And how unicorns look in the human folklore is a little different from what they actually look like, but that's still fine. Mm-hmm.
Same question about dragons, please.
Yes, dragons exist. The thing is that I think archaeologists and biologists are on the verge of figuring out that they actually existed. So they were like physical, but remember that it's not so far-fetched to think that when it comes to dinosaurs and all that there have been life forms that have kind of survived and adapted, because when a life form die out, it's simply because they don't adapt. You can also think when you have a flying, huge kind of reptile life form, and humans start to develop society or groups where it can hunt, they're easy targets, right? So, but they have existed all over the world, and they do exist also in the frequency on this planet that is kind of like the next channel. And when you look at the like mythology around these creatures all over the world, it's the same. It's what they represent. It's that kind of strength. It's that enormous kind of force. So often they represent change. It's combination of strength and vulnerability. it's both that being a carrier of divine information, but also being able to be kind of lost in the conflicts. So they're very kind of powerful beings when it comes to transformation and change, and also showing your strength. So often when you will dream about dragons, it's about connecting to your own divine strength, right? So although they do not exist physically on this planet anymore, they do exist in other forms of dimensions. And each life form, remember that each life form represents something specific. We're all tuning forks, and a specific life form carries, therefore, a specific type of information. Remember that we're all just different kind of swarms of information. And this is also how we can marry each other, right? There's a reason why you're being married in a specific way in life. It's because whatever you mirror yourself in carries that specific information that you need. It can be objects, people, places. So every life form there presents something specific. And dragons, therefore, are wonderful, and they do exist. And in meditation or prayer, whatever you do, you can try to connect to them, right? Because they're such a big part of human history, and they're still a part of the collective mind. So intuitively, you already know what they represent, right? So you can imagine, this is a wonderful thing about our imagination. When you imagine, you're giving instruction to your subconscious or like superconscious how to tune in, right? If you think of you in your conscious mind being able to decide what you focus on, think of your subconscious or superconscious as this enormous space which can connect beyond dimension. So when you give yourself instructions, you can let that part of your consciousness tune, and then you can connect. Right? So use your imagination. Life wants to support you. All life forms, normally when they reach a certain level, they are aware that we're all exchanging support, we're all exchanging love, we're all here for each other. And that is how all ecosystems work. Every level, all beings depend on each other to survive and to also continue to grow.
All right, we got another question in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've had, it was a question I had earlier, but so I think I've kind of gotten it explained a lot. But so I was just kind of asking to confirm that, because for me as well, I've had sleep paralysis many times, which is where when your body can't move, but you're still like present, but also kind of asleep. But I've also many times in the transition before I fall asleep, I'm still awake. I can walk around in my room. I can like move my arms, and many times I see a lot of different things in my room. Mm-hmm. Often I see like big spiders, small spiders, and spider webs, and sometimes faces, and sometimes different weird creatures. Mm-hmm. And sometimes also I had this one time I was going to the toilet from a cabin, and I looked into the sky, and there was stars, and then there was like lines between the stars. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because when I was walking to the toilet to pee, and I was like, oh, I didn't know there were lines between the stars. Mm-hmm. I thought like it was, I never had like night vision, so I couldn't see them, but the sky was really with like lines between the stars. Mm-hmm. And then the next day I was like, oh, that's not real. That was just something I saw. So I was also wondering, like, is this that I see something that kind of exists in a different dimension, or is it like a projection from my own subconscious, like dreaming, or like...
Right.
Yeah.
Remember that your subconscious is a catalog of information that comes from somewhere, right? So we're picking up on all sorts of things. Thinking that, again, if it's all about mirroring, your journey and who you are in this lifetime needs to be mirrored. And sometimes the subconscious will be working on things. It needs to be mirrored. And just mirroring it through your conscious awareness when you are awake is not necessarily always what will do the trick. So if you then think of your subconscious being this enormous, vast space, sometimes it will seek mirroring on its own because it has access to a kind of wider dimension. So when it comes to it producing this hologram, which is your experience, you can then include anything, right? So sometimes it means that it's picking up on things that are there, then it will be interpreting it into form, right? But that is what something is. All of this is basically information being interpreted into form. So, right, it's understanding that also the way we see it in our culture is we do not understand the physics, because what is the definition of something existing? Right? So first it's, as long as the information exists, it exists. And then it's a matter of how it expresses itself. And often the form can also be determined by the one who is observing, because the experience of the observation is happening in the individual. So therefore, whether or not something is there, in many ways is completely uninteresting, because we should rather say, okay, I am actually experiencing this. Why am I experiencing this? What does this mean to me? Instead of trying to point, is this objective reality? Because that is irrelevant, right? So we should always, therefore, look at all our experiences and say, yeah, they are real to me because I created this hologram for a reason, which means I need it. When I can also decode it and learn. And if we then learn to have the same attitude when it comes to life, and saying that, yeah, we're making all of this up, at the same time we're not. But relating to the hologram, that is the ongoing personal experience, that is always real to us in our space. So we do not really have to figure out if something is objectively there, because it's there in your experience, which is your journey, right? So when we can learn also just relax about that and say, simply because you're projecting it in your brain and it's not objectively there, it doesn't mean that the information is not present. And the information then means something to you and you need it in your process for something. That is the interesting way of dealing with it. And therefore, when we look at things and we discover things, yeah, it's there in our experience. Then what is it? What does it mean? And for instance, of course there are connections between everything. Often what people experience as they also expand is that they can see almost like kind of a full kind of multidimensional weave of lines between everything, because everything is connected and you can see it. So that is just one of those things where you're picking up an information, and then visually it's interpreted a certain way in your brain and then projecting into that hologram. So we should always assume that everything is real in my experience, right? And what is objectively real is not important at all. As long as we don't then say that what I'm experiencing has to be objectively real. So we then project it, right? So as long as we're relaxed and playful, we can include everything and anything, right? And life will be more colorful and vivid, and we will be getting even more variables. You know, we will be expanding our catalogs and how we experience things, which means that we can get more kind of specific mirrors no matter what our karma is and what we're studying.
All right. So since we are in Scandinavia, maybe it'd be appropriate to round off with a little bit of discussion around Scandinavian creatures. I personally have some experience with a sort of Norwegian type of sea troll or huldra that plays with our anchor chain on our boat all the time, especially at night, which is really fun when we're trying to sleep. And yes, so we've gotten some questions about trolls and gnomes and witches and the huldra. Just a little bit about, yeah, kind of that Scandinavian context of the Halloween creatures.
Right. When it comes to different beings, especially when you go back in time, right? People experience a lot more of these creatures of nature. Remember that there's one thing that's really interesting is that when we live in this world with the lights on, what is happening in our brain is that we relate more to the subjective projection. Because now we're living in a civilization made by humans, everything is controlled by humans, nothing else exists. Now, when it's darker, we produce less noise because people are calmer. We're not interacting as much. And often when we experience more darkness, again, the bridge between the subconscious and the conscious opens up. And that means that that part of you that can sense beyond your physical senses will be more active, and then that will be projected into your conscious brain. So this also happened in the old days. So, you know, when our physical senses are then weaker, we begin to pick up through the subconscious. So it meant that humans around the world, they've always been sensing creatures and seeing them because they are there. But often they operate in a slightly different frequency, right? So it means that they're not part of the human octave. They might be slightly above it or beneath, but they don't have the combination of frequencies. And again, think of it like a radio. Like all channels are in the same place. It's just how you tune, right? It's the same thing. So all these creatures exist, but they're not part of the physical dimension of humans. And because we've become more and more obsessed with our own created reality, we are not really relating to anything else. And so how we observe and kind of what we include, that has changed. Right? So in the old days, people would relate to many of these beings and would be completely natural. And they're still there, right? And many still experience them. Even in this country, when you go out to the countryside, many people will not talk about this with city folks. But within the family, they know that these creatures are still there and they interact with them. Right? So it's when you live in such a way that you're not completely blinded and overwhelmed by our current civilization, you will be more open to this and you will be experiencing. And again, especially darkness will turn on your subconscious brain and you will then start seeing more. And some of it will be your imagination, but some of it will also be real. So all of these creatures, they exist. And so it is all over the world. All of these mythical kind of beings exist, but not necessarily in the mythological way, right? Because that's also a cultural interpretation. But life is so wonderful. Everything you can possibly imagine exists somewhere. And human imagination does not stretch far enough, right? So I think it's for us as humans also to try to think that we live in a very kind of like slim octave and then we have everything else. Try to expand and include, right? Also when you're out in nature, it can be also easier to connect with different life forms. So try to then expand and include and invite. There are many of these beings that, because they operate in a frequency that are very close to ours, they can become visible. I interact with a lot of them. And it's always nice and friendly. You know, they come to me for the same reason you do. And, you know, it's just part of how things work. So don't be too human, right? And just believe that the world is what humans have created, right? It's so much wider. It's so much more wonderful. And also then, I say, try to go beyond the folklore part of it and understand that, yeah, life exists. There's so many different life forms that are out there, and they may be slightly different from what we culturally expect them to be, but we can still invite them. Again, there is no evil. We're all just trying to figure out how to live, and how to grow and go through our evolution as a life form, and also spiritually. That's what everybody is doing. So have fun with it, right? And understand that, what connects all of us is love. We're all here for the same reason. It doesn't matter where we're coming from, what life form we incarnate into, right? We're all here for the same reason in all dimensions. It is to work in our karma. It's to stretch towards our potentials. It's to heal. It's to love. It's to expand and then be part of that enormous ecosystem and to give back. We all have it in us that we want to nurture. We all want to give. And when you look at humans and human behavior, and how destructive humans are, and when we also look at, still we want to give, still we want to nurture, still we have the capacity of love. Think of life forms that are not doing all the human stuff, how much love they actually are channeling, right? What their intentions are. No matter where we are, no matter what dimension, what life form, what planet, we are all doing the same thing. Right? It's the same thing when it's said, like, when different cultures come to this planet. If they wanted to kill humans, they would have done it a long time ago. It's not that difficult. They're here to nurture. They're here to both study us, but figure out how to help us move kind of also now past this very strange phase in human history. Everybody wants to help each other. It's such a natural drive, right? The more we expand, the more we open our heart, the more time we spend giving, nurturing, lifting, because that's what we do. It's when we haven't reached that state, when we're in a state of self-centeredness, then everything becomes dangerous. Everything is competition. Everything wants to hurt us because we don't see what's really going on. And Halloween was originally a tradition where you were supposed to scare the evil creatures and the evil spirits away. And that would be humans. So try to just open your heart and see past all of this kind of human fixation on darkness and evil. Is that like life is actually the opposite. Life is light. Life is love. Light is lifting. It's nurturing. It's assisting each other. It's healing. It's bringing healing. Right? And it's always to be inspired also by Halloween and see, okay, I can do better. We can have fun with all of this. But look at this also as an opportunity to sharpen our senses, to include everything, everyone, to decide that we want to be a presence of love and healing, and to bring that into the world. Because the world is simply dark because there are not enough people who represent the light. It's that simple. So, represent the light and give people candy.
Thank you so much, IKYA. Thank you all for joining us for this special All Hallowed Eve or Halloween edition of IKYA Live. May you bring a little bit more spiritual, higher perspective to the celebration tomorrow. Bring some light and fun, and we do wish you a wonderful celebration tomorrow. Please join us again next Monday at 19 o'clock, 7 p.m. Oslo time for IKYA Live. And world news from the spiritual perspective. We do look forward to you joining us next week. And follow us in the meantime on social media, IKYA.official on all the channels. Subscribe here on YouTube and share this episode so that everyone can have an elevated celebration tomorrow for Halloween. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for IKYA Live.